Welcome to our deep dive all about maize. We'll be using the sources that you provided. You might be surprised to learn. Maize is entirely a human creation. You won't find it in the wild. And also, get this, there's a surprisingly heated debate over the terms corn versus maize.
Plus,
Maize has a lot of nutrients. It might even be linked to a lower risk of some diseases. So let's dig in.
Yeah, it really is amazing to think about, isn't it? Maize's journey, it all starts with teosinte, this wild grass. Doesn't really look much like the corn we know, but thousands of years ago, ancient farmers in what is now Mexico, they carefully selected and cultivated teosinte, and they slowly transformed it into the maize that we know and love today.
That selective breeding process is fascinating. It's almost like a long-term art project where each generation of farmers contributed to creating this food.
Exactly. They were shaping the genetic makeup of this plant, generation after generation, without even knowing about genes or DNA. And speaking of genes, one of the sources talks about George Beadle, a geneticist who studied maize back in the 1930s. And his work was really revolutionary because it showed just how closely related maize and teosinte really are, even though they look so different.
His research, it really changed how people thought about evolution, the idea that just a handful of genes could be responsible for such a big transformation. That was a game changer.
Absolutely. At the time, many scientists, they believed that evolution happened gradually, through small changes, little by little. But Beadle's work with maize, it showed that even just a few key genetic alterations could lead to these major evolutionary leaps. It was a real paradigm shift in our understanding of evolution.
It wasn't just tiny tweaks over a long time. There were some really big jumps involved. And it was all thanks to human intervention. Makes you wonder what those early farmers would think if you could see what maize has become today.
They would probably be astounded. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's address the elephant, or should I say the ear of corn in the room, the corn versus maize debate. So, what are your thoughts on how those terms are used?
Well, it's interesting how corn is the more common term in North America, while maize is used in scientific and international contexts, it seems like. Both terms are correct. It's just all about knowing your audience.
Exactly. Maize is a more accurate reflection of where the plant came from, and it helps to avoid confusion with other grains that are also called corn in different parts of the world. So for this deep dive, we'll stick with maize since we're taking a global perspective.
Sounds good to me. Maize it is. Now, on to something that affects all of us. Nutrition. The sources say that maize is surprisingly nutritious.
It really is. Maize gives you a good amount of protein and fiber, both of which are really important for a healthy diet. And depending on the variety, maize can be a good source of a bunch of different vitamins and minerals, including B vitamins, magnesium, and potassium.
The source mentions yellow maize being high in beta-carotene, which our bodies then convert to vitamin A, which is essential for good vision.
That's right. And vitamin A is also important for immune function, cell growth, and reproductive health. And here's something interesting from the research. The fiber in maize can actually help with digestion. It's got both soluble and insoluble fiber, which kind of work together to keep things moving through your digestive tract. And it also contributes to feeling full, which can help with weight management.
This is all great news for maize lovers.
No.
But the sources also mention some potential downsides. We need to be mindful of things like phytic acid and mycotoxins. Can you explain what those are and why they might be a concern?
So phytic acid, it's a compound that you find in maize and other grains, and it can bind to minerals like iron and zinc, and that can make them harder for our bodies to absorb. But soaking or fermenting maize can help reduce those phytic acid levels. Now, mycotoxins, those are toxic substances that are produced by certain fungi, and they can sometimes contaminate maize crops.
So, it's important to choose maize that's been properly stored and processed to minimize that risk of mycotoxin contamination. And it's worth noting that these potential concerns shouldn't deter people from enjoying maize, as with any food. Moderation and a balanced approach are key. But I think it's time we expand our horizons. Beyond simply eating maize, it's easy to think of maize just as food, but the sources talk about it being used for so much more than that, like animal feed, biofuels, and even industrial products.
Yeah, you're right. It's everywhere. A huge amount, like 65% of global maize production is used for animal feed. It's a key ingredient in the diets of a lot of different livestock, like cattle, pigs, and poultry.
Wow, that's a huge amount. I've heard some concerns about whether that's really sustainable, using that much maize for animal feed, especially with all the worries these days about global food security. What does the research say about that?
Well, it's complicated. There are strong arguments on both sides, some researchers say. that if we diverted more maize toward human consumption, it would be a much more efficient way to deal with food shortages. But then others point out that a lot of the maize that's used for feed is actually made up of byproducts that aren't really suitable for humans to eat. So it's really all about trying to find a balance. We need to have affordable protein sources, but we also need to make sure that we're using resources responsibly.
It seems like a tough issue with no easy answers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so shifting gears a bit, I'm really curious about maize's role in biofuels. How is maize actually being used to power our vehicles?
Well, that's where ethanol comes in. Maize is a primary source of ethanol, especially in the U.S., which is the biggest ethanol producer in the world. Ethanol is a biofuel, so it's a renewable energy source made from plant material, and it's often blended with gasoline to try to reduce how much we rely on fossil fuels.
So we're using corn to fuel our cars.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Are there any drawbacks, though, to using food crops like maize for fuel?
There are always trade-offs. Using maize for ethanol can affect food prices, and it can also bring up concerns about land use, deforestation, and how we allocate our resources. It's a tough balancing act between meeting our energy needs and also making sure we have enough food security for a growing population. The research highlights the importance of careful planning and sustainable farming practices. We need to make sure that we're not creating new problems while we're trying to solve others.
Sounds like a really complex issue. Requires careful consideration of both the economic and environmental impact. So let's talk about something that really surprised me. Maize's industrial applications. I was really intrigued by the fact that it's used in plastics. How does that even work?
Well, maize can be processed to extract starch, which is then used to create bioplastics. These are biodegradable plastics made from renewable resources, so they offer a more eco-friendly alternative to those traditional petroleum-based plastics.
Wow. So not only is maize feeding us and fueling our cars, it's helping to reduce plastic waste. The sources also mention a lot of other industrial uses.
Oh, yeah. It's truly remarkable how versatile maize is. It's used in everything, from adhesives and insulation to pharmaceuticals and cosmetics. You can even find maize derivatives in textiles, paper, even explosives.
Explosives. That's unbelievable. I never would have guessed that. It's clear that maize is everywhere in ways we don't even realize. But let's not forget about the simple pleasure of eating this grain. One of your forces focuses specifically on sweet corn, the kind we typically eat on the cob.
Ah, sweet corn, a summer favorite. And actually, contrary to what some people believe, sweet corn isn't that hard to digest. In fact, it's a good source of fiber, which, as we discussed, is good for digestion. It also contains vitamins and minerals and antioxidants. It's a surprisingly nutritious and tasty snack.
The source even included some recipes. I was really interested in the one for Mexican street corn salad. With grilled corn and cotija cheese, lime juice, and cilantro. I could practically taste it now.
Sounds delicious. Sweet corn is so versatile, you can eat it right off the cob. Grilled, add it to salads, soups, even desserts. And speaking of celebrating maize, your sources told us about a special holiday, National Maize Day. Have you heard of this?
I have not. Tell me more.
Well, National Maize Day was founded by artist Corinne Lightweaver back in 2004, and it's celebrated every year on July 29th. It's a day to think about the cultural and agricultural significance of maize, and to acknowledge the contributions of the Native Americans, who first cultivated this remarkable plant.
That's a great way to honor maize's legacy. One of the sources even suggests creating a special meal using ingredients that Native Americans traditionally used, alongside maize, like beans and squash and salmon.
That's a fantastic idea. It's a great opportunity to connect with the history of this crop and really appreciate its role in sustaining cultures for centuries.
This has been so interesting. From its humble beginnings as a wild grass to its global impact as a food source, a biofuel, and an industrial ingredient. Maize is truly fascinating and versatile. Wow, we've covered a lot of ground in this maize deep dive. Its history and how nutritious it is and all the different ways we use it and its cultural significance. But I'm curious, what do you think is next for maize?
That's a really great question. Thinking about how humans have shaped maize's evolution over all this time, it's pretty exciting to think about what might be next. What new types of maize will we see? What new and innovative uses will we discover?
Well, the sources you gave me talk about some potential areas for innovation, like developing maize that can withstand drought to deal with climate change. What else are researchers working on?
Scientists are working on a ton of really cool advancements. Imagine maize that doesn't need as much water, maize that can resist pests and diseases, maize that can grow in even harsher climates. These developments are going to be so important as we face all these changes in the world and a growing global population.
And, we talked about maize being used to make sustainable energy with ethanol. Could that be even bigger in the future?
Oh, definitely. Researchers are already looking at ways to get more ethanol from maize and also to make those conversion processes more efficient. And there's even more research going on into using maize to make other biofuels like biodiesel and biogas. Imagine a future where we're powering our cars and our homes with corn.
That would be incredible. We also talked about how cool it is that we can make bioplastics from maize starch. Do you think bioplastics could really help us reduce all that plastic waste?
I think they could. It's a pretty new technology, but as it gets cheaper to produce and the technology keeps getting better, bioplastics could really become a good alternative to those regular plastics, and we could use them for a lot of different things.
Right.
Imagine a world where all those plastic bottles and packaging just decompose naturally thanks to maize.
That would be a game changer. And what about maize being used for medicine and pharmaceuticals? One of the sources talked about zein. It's a protein in maize, and it might have some uses in drug delivery and tissue engineering.
You're right, maize has all these amazing compounds just waiting for us to use them. Researchers are looking into how zein can be used to make these tiny biodegradable capsules that could deliver medicine right to specific parts of the body. And there's even research into using materials from maize for healing wounds and regenerating bone.
Wow, it sounds like maize has a very bright future, potential breakthroughs in agriculture and energy and manufacturing and medicine. So before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a question to think about. Given this incredible journey that maize has been on, from a simple wild grass to this global staple, what role do you see maize playing in shaping the world of the future?
That's a great question. It really makes you think. Maize is really a testament to human ingenuity and what we can do with selective breeding. I think its future is tied to our future.
Mhm.
And I'm really excited to see what happens next in this incredible story.
I agree. This deep dive has really been eye-opening for me. I've learned so much about maize. It's more than just food. It's a vital part of animal feed and renewable energy and building materials and manufacturing, and it could even lead to breakthroughs in medicine. It makes you appreciate the ingenuity of those first farmers who started this whole journey thousands of years ago.
Their legacy lives on in every kernel of corn that we see. And as we've learned, the story of maize is far from over. It's a story that keeps evolving. And I think it's going to keep surprising us, offering new possibilities and solutions for the challenges that we'll face in the future.
Well, thank you for joining us on this incredible deep dive into the world of maize. We hope you learned a lot and that you have a newfound appreciation for this remarkable crop and all its potential to shape the world that we live in.